Well, the last talk for lunch, and in a way, a talk of an alien, because I'm an academic, I'm a quant, so I'm totally out of what you're all doing here. I still think, and the nice part of my talk for me, and hopefully for you, is that I was asked to present here and do something interactive, and that's what I'm trying to do, in a sense of learning from each other. So having attended yesterday's conference only partially, I realized I can learn a lot. I mean, because I do quantitative research, I will show you in a moment. I do experiments, and we are recently moving towards qualitative research, more big data things. We're discussing this in academia, and I realize you're all doing that. So I can learn a lot from what I hear here, what I am hearing here, and I hope that just seeing something totally different for you might also be interesting and give you a slightly different perspective on what you're working at, because the main aim, understanding people, is the same for all of us, of course. So what am I gonna do? Well, I was asked to talk about trust. And I'm a behavioral economist / psychologist, and I did a lot of work on trust in the past, but probably in a very different way than you are used to. So what you also know is that, well, trust is something we cannot observe. So what I learned from my time at this conference is that what you do if you cannot observe something is talk to people, discuss with them, run focus groups, interviews, whatever. What behavioral economists do is actually, well, strip it down from all this content, look at the basic structure, what is trust in just very, very analytic terms, and then find a way, a game or something similar, that represents this basic structure and see how people react to it. And that's the way we experiment with respect to trust. And of course, we cannot do something like on that picture, which would be obviously from a behavioral economist the optimum. Just do what medical or biologists do with rats, do it to people. We cannot really do it, but we try to go a little bit in that direction. So we take our idea what trust is, and from that idea we start, as I said, and strip it down to its basics. Instead of digging very, very deep into what the meaning for people is, we try to catch a very general idea what happens if I'm in a trusting relationship. So on the previous slide I had that picture. Well, what is that person doing? Well, probably if I see that picture they're both going to fall down, but if this would not be the case, what are these people doing? Well, there is a vulnerability. Somehow one person makes him or herself vulnerable to the action of the other. So that's the very basic structure of a trusting relationship. So what do we do when we run experiments? Well, we take this very basic structure, formulate it very precisely, and put it to test in a lab, and then we see how people react to that structure. Of course, experiments have one big issue, and that's the external validity. So wireless functioning here is not very good. So I have prepared a very short experiment that I would like to try with you now to see the structure. And then we can immediately start the discussion and see what do you think. Does this tell us something about trust? Is this totally nuts? Do we get somewhere with these basic structured things, or do we not get anywhere? So we tried, we set it up, but the wireless is really 10 minutes it's here, 10 minutes it's not. So we try 1 minute. If it doesn't work, I just tell you what I plan to do. So if you could take out your mobile devices and try to connect to that thing here, ClassX Unipassau.de. And then you choose, you get a menu. If you manage to log in, you get a menu where you can choose my university, my name, then type in participant, then it asks for a password, which should be experiment. If that works, we're nearly there. If it doesn't work within a minute, the technician tells me whether it works or not. Anybody being able to log into something? Oh, this is even worse than in universities. I mean, and that's amazing. I'm very much used to very bad IT things at universities. So did anybody manage to log in? No. No. Okay, if nothing works, then I just tell you what I plan to do. That's a pity, because you've seen that. Probably all your tools look much nicer when you use them. This is totally stripped down to the very basics, because we have to have it working in university environments with bad connection. Well, there are worse connections where it doesn't work. Can I just see the main website of the thing? So what you should have seen, actually, is our basic setup to study trust. So that means there are actually 2 logged in. Wow. So the 2 people could play, actually. I don't know who it is, but it would help us to generate at least 1 result. So with 2 people we can play, actually. So is the teacher from Hartmann from the dual? No, he's not here anymore, because we use this a lot in teaching, actually, and there it usually works. Are there more people logged in now? Because I don't want to spend too much time on trying to get this working.
One hit might be that it's not an HTTPS, it's an HTTP.
Yes.
Pay attention, don't include an S in the
Okay, yeah, that people don't do it, yeah. If we get a 4th person, that would already be great, because it's pairwise. If we have 4, the moment we have 4, can you just press start when we have 4, so that we do not waste too much time? Usually I would have like 50 now, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So, oh, 15. Okay. Wow. So then press start, please. So now those of you who are logged in should be able to do something, and your main instruction is up there. So you're playing with another participant in this room. Every one of you, imagine, has 10 euro. You can send, so the red player can send all, nothing, or part of these 10 euro to the green player. The amount sent will be multiplied by 3 and given to the green player. The green player then can send back all, nothing, or a part of it to the red player. And then the game ends. So those who have access, please try to do something if you manage. And we can see whether people do something. So we have 2 people who are doing something. Once everybody is set, we show the results. We're nearly done. So 4 people still thinking or being stuck in... Okay, let's display results. Oh, wow, we have very nice people in the room. Huh? So what happened? Well, I said we have very nice people in the room because what you see here on the x-axis is how much people, like the red players, send, and then you also see on the y-axis how much they got back. And obviously, these guys up here managed to get the optimum because that increases the whole pie that could be distributed to the maximum, and then they can split it nicely, right? So whenever you send like the maximum amount, you generate the maximum amount of money, the maximum amount of trust, and then can split it. The moment you trust less, well, you generate less money, and less money can be split. What is really nice with this audience, and what already shows some of the caveats we have when we do this research at universities, is that we would never get such a result at the university. Because students come to our experiments because they want to earn money, and they know that everybody else in the room also wants to earn money. So they anticipate that people, once they get the money, would not send it back. So they don't send it. So we have a lot of stuff going on like in that area when we do this with students. Can I go back to my presentation? Or could you? Thank you very much. So that's the basic structure that you just played with, is the so-called trust game that had been invented in 1995, which is one of these exercises in stripping down such a situation as complex, as loaded as trust into something very, very structural, right? Just giving a basic structure. So I make myself vulnerable to the other person because I know together we could gain a lot. If we collaborate, we can really gain because then the money is maximized, or the utility, or whatever you might think of. But of course, if the other person is not trustworthy, she just moves away with all the money, and I've lost everything. So that's the essence of a trusting situation. But of course, this is very, very stripped down from all the meaning that you would get if you do qualitative research on trust. And so, does this have anything to do with what happens in the real world? Is this anyhow linked to external stuff? Well, actually, I think it partially is, but we could profit a lot from sometimes digging deeper. Why do I think it partially is? Well, having done it here is an example of that, because you behave totally different from our students. And that means it captures something of a group of people and their motives and their ideas. That is not just, well, with this structure you will always get whatever. No, it captures something of you, and we have examples of that from studies that we've done in firms where we did similar little games. So that's a different little game. On the right side here, where you can categorize people afterwards through a very, very similar procedure, just it's a bit more complex, so I didn't want to do it here, into people who are net givers, who usually contribute more than they get back to a firm, net takers, those who usually know how to get things in their advantage, and the matchers, who are like reciprocal types. And we correlated this just from this tiny little experiment with the type of awards this firm has, where people can send awards to their colleagues for collaboration. And it's an award where you have to write like 200 words why you think this person is so fantastic collaborator. This goes to his manager. So it's a meaningful thing. And as you can see, it links with that. So those who are the net givers in our little game get these awards more often. So it somehow links to something in the real world. On the left-hand side, this is a totally different thing. A study that has been done in small-scale societies in India, in many different countries, where they also ran these little games on trust and on other things and correlate that with the real-world experience of these people. And they find that the more market-integrated, the more these people trust strangers, the more these people give to strangers, the less market-oriented, the less they do. The higher the payoff in these societies is to cooperation, the more cooperative these people are in these tiny little games. So somehow these games get at something. However, so I have to look on my watch because it was meant to be interactive, so I want to have time for discussion. So it seems these games get at something. So they're not just exercises in putting analytics to the lab. And they also, you see that people behave differently in these games, whether they play against a computer or a human. So they distinguish whether they play against a computer or a human. We can actually use medicine, like giving them oxytocin, which is something that stimulates bonding, essentially. And they behave differently in these games, but only when playing against humans, not when playing against a computer. So it has something to do with human interaction, even though it's so stripped down of everything that qualitatively makes a trusting situation. So somehow it seems to do the trick. But then there is a lot of stuff that affects how people play in these trust games. And I have own research where we test for personality factors, and personality matters a lot. So it's not just a reaction to the situation, personality matters a lot. It matters a lot whether I play with a woman or a man, and I know it. It matters a lot what the kind of task is, what the thing I trust in is. So what we did there is we did not just ask people to send around money, but to really trust in the work of someone else. And then we had different types of tasks, and people knew a little bit about the other player, whether he was male or female, whether he was an econ student or not, and that changed a lot. So subtle signals, stereotypes, they all play an important role, and we can even see that in experiments. So probably what we would need, actually, to understand now, moving away from that stripped down thing that tells us something, it's somehow meaningful, but then to really being able to apply this to situations like in our firm, to tell the firm, well, what can we do to make people collaborate across departments, better with the client, better with customers? We need more than just this little game that helps us to understand, well, these people are seemingly, like you, seem to be very much inclined to trust each other and to be trustworthy. So that is a good starting point. But now if I want to, like if you were my clients and I want to advise, what could you do to just use is not a nice word, but to make something out of this social capital that is here in the room, I need to understand better the why, the how, the what affects it, in what case this would not be. And that's where I think the qualitative stuff comes in. So the quantitative gives me a subtle signal about, well, yeah, this is different than if I go to my students. But now, what is different? Why is it different? And so what we tried to do in a recent study with a firm is we tried to combine the two things, so the qual and the quant. Because, well, we're economists in general, we like quantitative measures. The firms we work with are very quantitatively oriented firms at the moment, so they like to get numbers. But we thought, well, we have to dig a bit deeper into the meaning of these little games. So we stick to little games, but what we did before were focus groups with people in the firm and trying to find out, so now it's about little collaborative situations, and we will strip them down to little experiments, but what is the context of these situations that is most important for you? What are the things where you really think you need an intervention to improve collaboration and to improve trusting behavior also? And one of these situations that people then came up with was this one. A senior vice president reports enthusiastically about a new product in the internal project steering committee. Employee A knows, however, that quality management has significant problems in troubleshooting with the product in use. Now, there are doubts about the possible success of this product. Employee A could report of these problems in the project steering committee. However, he feared that this would adversely affect his relationship with the senior vice president. So that is a situation where they told us, well, actually we want them to be honest in such a situation. So this is a very important situation, and they should trust that our firm values that our firm values are such that we want these mistakes to be found, we want people to report. And we want to know, do people believe us that this is the case or not? And then you run into, I think as a quantitatively oriented person, I'm always wondering, so with the qualitative, so we went to that point, and now I guess, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, your approach would then probably be to talk to people and to try to find out what they would do. And then my fear is if we do that, well, would they report honestly, or would they think, well, how is her relationship with the management? How does this end up there? So I'm not sure whether I would get the answer I would like to get. So what we then did, and I'm not sure whether we get the answer we get a true answer either. But what we did then is we set up an pseudonymous survey. So the data is all at the university, with no link to the firm whatsoever, so they cannot access the data, and it cannot be linked to any individual identifying information. And what we did, and this is a bit more complex, so what we did then, we presented this type of situation, just the way you see it, to about 1,000 people in the firm. We had a couple of these situations, and then we asked them, okay, so this has been given to 1,000 people in this firm. So what do you think among these 1,000 people in the firm, as how frequently occurring do the others, the 1,000 people, evaluate this behavior of employee A? So we are not asking them what is your opinion, but we are asking them, find the point that everybody else in the room would cross. And if you find that point, you get 50 euro. So economists always believe you have to motivate people, otherwise they wouldn't do it. I'm not sure whether this is true, but we usually think people are like rats, and they only behave if you give them some goodie. So, and we did this with how frequently occurring and how appropriate would you consider that. And well, what we found is probably pretty obvious. What would you think? Do people do that? It's frequent that they do not report? Would they think it's appropriate that they do not report? No, right, exactly. That's what we found. People thought that everybody thinks it's not appropriate to do that, and everybody thinks everybody does it. So, but we had other of these little vignettes where we figured, no, there is no discrepancy. Actually, people know what they should do, and they do that. But there are some areas where this is not the case, and we believe that as this was completely anonymous, and it was just like guessing what the others would think, we have a pretty good access to what people really think and do in that firm about these factors. And now we can we report it back to the management. Well, in many areas, people trust that your intentions are good and they behave in the right way. But in this area, there is an issue. So how can we go about that? What can we do with that? And well, that's the story that I wanted to tell you. And now I'm really interested in like input from Qual, how we could improve on these things. Because what we're good at, I think, are stripping down the complex situation to its very basic structures, but then digging deeper into, well, what are the underlying things? Where are the areas where we can really do something also to improve interaction, to improve trust, collaboration? I think we need more than just understanding, well, 60% send €10 in that game. Thank you, and I'm looking very much forward to your comments.
Yes.
Hi, really interesting. The point that gets me about Qual is that difference you mentioned there at the end between the proportion who say it's the wrong thing to do, but it's almost accepted practice. So digging into that is exactly why. Yes, we have to be careful about post-rationalization, get that, but with the right question, the right techniques, the right method, that, for me, is the really interesting part to dig into, and where Qual could definitely help.
Contextual inquiry is central to behavioral economics, I believe. So how you feel in which context depends how you behave, as do emotional aspects. So I'd imagine most qualitative researchers would need to understand the context, emotions, which is the same as behavioral economics, I would believe, and sort of like taken out of context, results are rather abstract. The second worry I'd have is replicability, to what extent these small experiments actually repeat themselves if you do them again and again. And there's a lot of questions about that in the academic community, that they're actually not like medical science. If you do them again, you have a 50% chance of getting the same result.
Right, so in medical science, actually, it was lower. So replicability is a big issue right now, because we were also convinced, as we generate numbers, that must be hard science. And now there has been a big issue that actually started in medical science about replicability that moved on via psychology to us. So for us in numbers, it's at the moment at 60% replicates, roughly. So that's a little bit better than medicine. But of course, these little things, and that I think you gave the answer in the first part of your question, because context matters a lot, and it's hard to do anything context-free. Even such a stripped-down experiment has some kind of context, and you have to be aware of that. And that may reduce replicability, actually, a lot.
But what do you say to 60%? I find it rather worrying. Well,
in medicine, it was below 20, I think. that replicate it from the bulk of studies.
But the role of chance then is rather high.
Yes. But I'm not saying that this is fantastic. I'm just saying we're doing a bit better than medicine. But it is worrisome, and I think, again, the key is that we believed that in the beginning with these little studies, behavioral economics believed that they can take the context out and get at the pure behavior. And I don't think there exists anything like pure behavior, and there also doesn't exist anything like a context-free situation. Even in our lab, we have a context, because it's a lab context where you come to, even if it has white walls and computers and nothing else, it's a context where you come to with a specific mindset that instills in you a specific idea of what this is about.
So we all exist. Sorry, the other word to mention is culture. So every company has a culture, and how you behave is determined by a dominant culture. We all exist within a German culture. When I speak English, I try to have a sense of humor. When I do German, I have at least the hope that I'm more rational. But all of these, so culture would be the other fact that if you do one experiment, say in China, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, I would hope that most qualitative researchers would be quite aware of that, because we are very aware of how all of these things change the way people react, their positivity bias, etc., etc. And the same is true within every culture. So corporate cultures are particularly strong, and I think perhaps examined across corporations, how you set a culture, how that flows down from the top, and what does empowerment mean. But that was a bit woolly, so I don't really have a question, so apologies for that.
Well, I have a question, because that struck me during that conference. How can I, I see that as a experimental researcher, that it's hard to get my own cultural biases out of even these relatively context-free situations. How can I do this as a qualitative researcher when I interview people? Like I've seen people interviewing people in South Africa or Mexico or wherever. So how do I get my own cultural bias out of the way I talk to these people, I interview these people? How can I get over that I'm like a Western European woman, and now I'm in Japan talking to a Japanese man? How can I get the intercultural thing out of that? You can't.
Actually, you have the same issue with a questionnaire. I got a question or a suggestion. You could embrace actually the context, and that's going in the direction of culture. Business ethnography addresses issues like that, and they try to find out what are dominant values, practices, organizational principles that are tested by observation. We heard about that also yesterday and today, I would say. So contextual inquiry, observation, participant observation, with reflecting you being in the field, which is a part of ethnographic academic training, I would say. So it would be doing it completely different than you, so, but addressing the same issues, really dive into the context and be there, and get the stories of the people. Storytelling is another buzzword in that area, but it's just not only focusing on trust. There might be different values in a company and practices that matter, perhaps mistrust, for example.
But do you think, like I mean, of course I'm aware of that literature. Do you think you get something out of that is applicable beyond the specific place? So there has been a very interesting book by Daniel Biunza recently, Taking the Floor on Wall Street Bankers, and he has done a long ethnography there. It's totally fascinating, but does this give me anything that I could generalize to any other context, or is it just something that Or is there no such thing as would you say there is no such thing as generalization in human behavior within firms anyway?
You have been talking about context and that your lab context is important. We are in a context here. It's a conference context. I'm looking at you. You are looking at me. It's very distant. We're at table. It's a passive situation, not very interactive. You're inputting. I think that works in quite many countries, but not always. Yeah. So, and if you use that for qualitative focus groups, you might not succeed in some Asian countries. Yeah, you need to do that very differently, even between the UK and Germany. A group discussion is something different. So yes, some principles I would say have similarities, and there are very much differences. The question is likely perhaps if you're searching for global similarities. I have to admit I'm a trained ethnographer, so I'm looking for the global differences, which I think are also very interesting. Might be the purpose what you're looking for, and I'm not up to saying you cannot find that. Keep on looking for it. Yeah? So, but I think context is a very rich thing, and even you can videotape it, yeah? So you can do that quantitatively, heavily. Yeah? So there are automation techniques to see things. You can see emotion, sentiments, and so on. Perhaps that helps, but without context, you are without context. And so your findings are without context, period. From my side.